Las Vegas, 1970. The hallway behind the stage was already shaking from the sound of music. It was late afternoon in Las Vegas, but inside the hotel, time seemed to have disappeared. Technicians hurried beneath the stage lights. Musicians checked their instruments. Someone shouted for another microphone. A wardrobe assistant carried a garment bag across the hallway while another man rushed past with a stack of papers covered in handwritten notes. And behind a closed rehearsal room door, Elvis Presley was trying to make one song perfect. Again, and again, and again. He stood beneath the harsh rehearsal lights, wearing the white jumpsuit that would later become part of his unmistakable Las Vegas image. Gold details caught the light whenever he moved. But there was nothing glamorous about his expression. He looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper. The band finished the song. Elvis lowered the microphone. Again. The musicians exchanged quick glances. The drummer counted them in. The guitars started. The horns followed. Elvis sang. But halfway through the second run, he stopped. No. The music died instantly. He looked toward the stage. The ending is wrong. One of the musicians nodded. They tried it again. Behind them, near the doorway, a woman had been standing silently for several minutes. Priscilla. She wasn't dressed for the stage. She wasn't there to perform. She was simply watching. Watching the man everyone else called Elvis. The man thousands of people would soon scream for. The man who could walk onto a stage and make an entire room forget everything else. But Priscilla wasn't looking at the superstar. She was looking at the husband. And what she saw seemed to hurt. Elvis suddenly noticed her. Their eyes met. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The musicians kept waiting. Elvis slowly lowered the microphone. Hey! Priscilla smiled faintly. It wasn't a real smile. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting. She looked around the room. Everyone was watching them now. I'll wait. Elvis shook his head. No, come in. She took one step forward. Then stopped. There was something in her expression that Elvis couldn't understand. Or perhaps he understood it too well. What is it? He asked quietly. Nothing. Elvis gave a small laugh. You've never been good at saying nothing. She looked at him. For a few seconds, she said nothing at all. Then she whispered, I don't know where I fit anymore. The room became completely silent. Elvis stared at her. One of the musicians looked down at his instrument. Nobody wanted to be the person standing between a husband and wife during a moment like that. Priscilla looked at Elvis one last time. Then she turned around and walked out. The door closed behind her. Elvis didn't move. Not for several seconds. Then the drummer quietly asked, Should we take 5? Elvis didn't answer. He was still staring at the door. The same door she had just walked through. Finally, he whispered, Yeah. He put the microphone down. But he didn't follow her. Not yet. And that was the moment everything changed. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you were standing in that rehearsal room, would you tell Elvis to go after Priscilla immediately, or would you give her space? Tell me your answer in the comments. And while you're here, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many different places are listening to this story tonight. Because what happened next was something nobody in that rehearsal room expected. The musicians slowly began packing away their instruments. The room emptied. One by one, the voices disappeared. The footsteps faded down the hallway. Soon Elvis was alone. Or so he thought. He walked toward the mirror. His reflection stared back at him. The white suit, the rings, the carefully styled hair, the image, the legend, everything the world wanted to see. But Elvis didn't see any of that. He saw a man who had just watched his wife walk away. He touched the edge of the mirror, then quietly said, "Everybody thinks they know me." His voice sounded strange in the empty room, almost like he was speaking to someone who wasn't there. Outside, the hotel continued to move. People laughed. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Guests walked through luxurious hallways without knowing what was happening behind the rehearsal doors. Elvis walked toward the piano. He sat down. For a moment, he simply stared at the keys. He didn't play. Then his fingers touched the piano. One note, then another. A slow melody filled the room. It wasn't one of the songs on the evening's set list. Nobody had heard it during rehearsal. Nobody had been given the sheet music. It was something private. Something Elvis had been working on in secret. He played a few more notes, then stopped. He looked toward the door. He almost stood up. Almost. But instead, he sat back down. He began playing again. The melody was imperfect. Slow. Uncertain. Like someone trying to say something but not knowing how. Elvis took a deep breath, then began to sing softly. Not the powerful voice his audience expected. Not the voice that could fill an arena. This was quieter, almost fragile. The kind of voice someone uses when they are afraid another person might hear them. He sang about distance, about being surrounded by people and still feeling alone, about loving someone while being unable to explain why everything had become so difficult. He stopped. His head dropped. Damn it. He rubbed his face. Then he heard something. A faint sound outside the door. He froze. Someone was standing in the hallway. Elvis slowly looked toward the entrance. He didn't know who it was. The door remained closed. He waited. Nothing. Then came the faintest sound. A breath. A quiet sob. Elvis stood. He walked toward the door. His hand reached for the handle, but he stopped before touching it. He knew who was outside. Priscilla. She hadn't left. She had been standing there, listening. And suddenly, Elvis understood something. She hadn't walked out because she didn't care. She had walked out because she cared too much. He rested his forehead against the door. Neither of them spoke. For several seconds, there was only silence between them. Then Elvis quietly said, "You can come in." No answer. He waited. "Please." Still nothing. Then her voice came through the door. "I don't want to come in." Elvis closed his eyes. "Okay. I don't want to fight. Neither do I. I don't even know what we are fighting about anymore." That sentence hit him harder than anything she could have shouted. Elvis stepped away from the door. He looked at the empty rehearsal room. The chairs, the microphones, the instruments, the costumes, the entire machine that had become his life. Then he looked back at the door. "You're right." There was silence. "I don't know either." A few minutes later, Priscilla finally opened the door. She stood there with tears in her eyes. Elvis didn't move toward her. For once, he didn't try to fix everything with a joke. He didn't turn on the charm. He didn't become the entertainer. He simply looked at her and said, "Tell me." She wiped her cheek. "Tell you what? What you were going to say before you left." Priscilla looked down. "I was going to say that I miss you." Elvis's expression changed. She continued, "I miss the man who used to look at me when nobody else was around." He swallowed. "You still have him, do I?" The question hung in the room. Elvis looked away because he didn't have an answer. Outside that room, the hotel was preparing for another spectacular Elvis Presley performance. Hundreds of people would soon gather. Lights would come on. The band would play. The audience would scream. And Elvis would walk onto that stage looking like he owned the entire city. But behind one closed door, the man behind the image was beginning to realize something terrifying. He could control a stage. He could control a rehearsal. He could control thousands of people with one movement. But he couldn't control the heart of the woman standing in front of him. And for the first time that afternoon, Elvis wasn't afraid of losing a performance. He was afraid of losing her. He looked at the piano, then at Priscilla. "I wrote something." She looked confused. "What?" He nodded toward the piano. "For you." Her eyes widened. "You wrote a song." "I don't know if it's a song." "What is it?" Elvis hesitated, then answered, "Something I couldn't say." Priscilla slowly walked toward the piano. Elvis sat down. His fingers hovered above the keys. But before he played the first note, there was a knock on the rehearsal room door. 3 short knocks. Elvis and Priscilla looked at each other. A voice came from outside. "Mr. Presley, we are ready for you." Elvis didn't answer. The voice came again. 5 minutes. Elvis looked at Priscilla, then at the piano, then back at the door. For the first time that day, he had a decision to make. The audience was waiting. The band was waiting. The entire hotel was waiting. But Elvis wasn't thinking about the show anymore. He was thinking about the woman standing beside him. And whatever he decided to do next. Someone outside that room was about to witness something they were never supposed to see. The knock came again. 3 quiet taps against the rehearsal room door. "Mr. Presley, we really need you." Elvis didn't answer. He was sitting at the piano, his hands resting motionless above the keys. Priscilla stood beside him. Neither of them moved. Outside that door, the world was waiting for Elvis Presley. Inside the room, a husband was trying to figure out how to speak to his wife. Finally, Elvis looked toward the door. "Tell them I'll be there." The voice outside hesitated. "Mr. Presley, the band is ready." "I said I'll be there." A pause. Then footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Elvis turned back toward Priscilla. She was watching him carefully. "You're really going to perform?" He looked at her. "I have to." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he gave a tired smile. "Because that's what Elvis does." Priscilla's expression softened. "And what does my husband do?" The questions stopped him. Elvis looked down at the piano. "I don't know anymore." Priscilla stepped closer. "You used to." He slowly looked up. "Maybe I forgot." She reached for his hand. "You don't have to be Elvis with me." He squeezed her fingers. "I know." "No," she whispered, "I don't think you do." The room became quiet again. Then Elvis stood. He walked to the mirror. For several seconds, he stared at his reflection. The white jumpsuit, the gold decorations, the rings, the carefully styled hair, the image of the man who could command an entire audience. He touched the mirror. Everybody wants something from him. Priscilla stood behind him. What about you? Elvis looked at her through the mirror. I just want 5 minutes where nobody wants anything. She smiled sadly. Then take 5 minutes. The hallway outside had become busier. People were beginning to realize Elvis wasn't coming out. A stage manager checked his watch. A musician asked whether the rehearsal would continue. Someone whispered that the schedule had changed. Another person said Elvis was probably resting. Nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew that the biggest problem in the building wasn't the concert. It was the two people behind the closed door. Finally, Elvis opened the door. The hallway went silent. Everyone looked at him. He looked completely calm. But something about him was different. The stage manager approached. Everything okay? Elvis nodded. Yeah. We are ready whenever you are. Elvis looked over his shoulder. Priscilla was still inside. For a moment, he seemed to consider saying something. Instead, he turned toward the stage. Let's do it. The lights came down. The audience erupted. Thousands of voices filled the room. Elvis walked onto the stage. The reaction was immediate. People stood. Hands clapped. Cameras flashed. The musicians began the opening number. Elvis smiled. He moved across the stage with the confidence everyone expected. The audience saw the king. They saw the white suit. They saw the famous movements. They saw the smile. But nobody saw his eyes. Every few seconds, Elvis glanced toward the side of the stage, toward the darkened backstage area, toward the place where Priscilla was standing. She watched him, and suddenly she understood. He wasn't performing for the audience. Not entirely. He was performing for her. The first song ended. The crowd exploded. Elvis laughed. Thank you. He took a breath. Then the band began the next song. But halfway through it, something unexpected happened. Elvis stopped. The musicians looked at him. The audience became confused. Elvis looked toward the piano player. Then toward the orchestra. Give me a second. He walked toward the center of the stage. The room quieted. He looked out at thousands of faces. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled. You know. The crowd laughed softly. Elvis continued. Sometimes you can be surrounded by thousands of people. He paused. And still feel like you're talking to nobody. The audience grew quiet. The musicians exchanged glances. Elvis looked toward the backstage entrance. Priscilla was there. Watching. He continued. Sometimes the person you really need to talk to. He stopped. His voice became softer. Is standing somewhere you can't see. Priscilla's eyes filled with tears. Elvis turned back toward the band. Let's play something different. The musicians looked surprised. They weren't prepared for what he was about to do. Elvis walked toward the piano. He sat down. The entire room was silent. His fingers touched the keys. One note, then another. It was the same melody from the rehearsal room. The private melody. The one nobody was supposed to hear. Priscilla covered her mouth. She realized what he was doing. Elvis was playing the song. For her. In front of everyone. But he hadn't told her he would. The melody continued. Slow. Tender. Unpolished. There was no grand arrangement. No dramatic orchestra. Just Elvis. His voice entered softly. The audience listened. Nobody screamed. Nobody interrupted. For once, thousands of people were completely silent. Because something about the performance felt different. It didn't feel like a concert anymore. It felt like someone had accidentally opened a door into another person's private life. Elvis finished the first verse. His eyes remained lowered. Then he stopped. He looked toward the side of the stage. Priscilla was crying. He saw her. Their eyes met. Elvis smiled. Not the stage smile. A real one. And then he continued. If you're still listening, here's a question for you. Would you want Elvis to sing a private song for you in front of thousands of people, or would that be too personal? Comment private if you think some feelings should stay between two people. And don't forget to like this story, subscribe, and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I read those comments, and it's incredible seeing people from different places following the same story. Because what happened after Elvis finished that song was even more unexpected. The final note faded. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the audience erupted. But Elvis didn't stand. He remained at the piano. His head was lowered. The applause became louder. Still, he didn't move. Then someone backstage began clapping. Priscilla. Elvis looked up. She was smiling through her tears. He stood. The audience rose with him. Elvis bowed. But instead of returning to the microphone, he walked directly toward the side of the stage. A stage manager tried to stop him. Mr. Presley, we've got another number. Elvis shook his head. Not yet. He walked backstage. The audience couldn't see where he went. The band waited. The crowd murmured. Backstage, Elvis found Priscilla. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Then she whispered, "You weren't supposed to sing that." "I know. Why did you?" Elvis looked at her. "Because you were right." "About what?" "I've been performing for everyone." He took a breath. "But I forgot how to talk to you." Priscilla looked down. "You don't have to prove anything to me." "I know." "Then why did you?" Elvis smiled faintly. "Because I was scared." She looked at him. "Scared of what?" He hesitated. "Scared that if I stopped performing long enough." His voice cracked slightly. "You might realize there was nothing left underneath." Priscilla's expression changed. She stepped toward him. "There is." Elvis looked at her. "There always was." She touched his face. "And that's the man I miss." Elvis closed his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the sound of the audience came roaring from the stage. Thousands of people were chanting his name. Elvis, Elvis, Elvis. Elvis opened his eyes. He looked toward the stage. Then back at Priscilla. "That's them." She smiled. "I know. They're waiting." "I know." He sighed. "Every night." Priscilla nodded. "And tomorrow." He laughed quietly. "And the night after that." She smiled. "But tonight." She paused. "Tonight you have 5 minutes." Elvis smiled. He took her hand. 5 minutes. They walked away from the stage together. But neither of them noticed the person standing at the end of the hallway. A young assistant. He had stopped to deliver a message. And he had heard everything. He had heard Elvis singing the private melody. He had seen Priscilla crying. And he had watched them disappear down the hallway together. The assistant stood frozen. He knew he had just witnessed something that was never supposed to leave that room. But he also knew something else. The story was too powerful to forget. And before the night was over, someone would ask him what he had seen. Back inside the rehearsal room, the piano was still open. The microphone was still waiting. The lights were still on. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Except now, there was a folded piece of paper sitting on the piano. The assistant noticed it. He walked closer. On the paper were handwritten lyrics. At the top were 3 words. "For Priscilla, never." He stared at it, then slowly stepped away. Because suddenly he understood. That song had never been intended for an audience. It had never been intended for Las Vegas. It had never even been intended to become a real performance. It had been written for one person. And somehow, thousands of people had just heard it. But there was one final line written beneath the lyrics. A line nobody in the audience had heard. A line Elvis had never sung. The assistant read it. And his expression changed. Because it revealed exactly what Elvis had been afraid to say. "If you ever leave, I don't know who I'll be when the lights go out." The assistant folded the paper again. He placed it exactly where he'd found it. And walked away. But he didn't know that someone else had seen him read it. Someone standing silently in the doorway. Priscilla. She had returned for the paper. And now she knew the truth. Not the truth the audience saw. Not the truth the newspapers would ever print. But the truth Elvis had hidden behind the lights. And as she stood there alone, she realized something that frightened her even more. The man she had been trying to reach all evening had finally let her see him. The question was whether she could stay after seeing everything. Priscilla stood in the doorway. She hadn't moved. The folded piece of paper was still in her hand. She had read the final sentence twice. Then a third time. "If you ever leave, I don't know who I'll be when the lights go out." Her fingers tightened around the paper. For several seconds, she simply stared at the empty rehearsal room. The piano was still open. One of Elvis's rings had been left beside the microphone. A glass of water sat untouched on the piano. Everything looked frozen in time. But Priscilla knew that the man who had written those words wasn't the same man the audience had seen 30 minutes earlier. On stage, he had been powerful, confident, almost untouchable. Back here, he had been afraid. She walked slowly toward the piano. Her fingertips touched the keys. One note sounded. She pulled her hand away. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Elvis was standing in the doorway. He stopped when he saw the paper in her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His eyes dropped to the page. Then back to her. "You read it." It wasn't a question. Priscilla nodded. "I wasn't supposed to." "No. Why didn't you sing the last line?" Elvis looked away. "Because I couldn't." "Why?" He took a slow breath. "Because if I sang it." He paused. "Then it would become real." Priscilla looked at the words again. Was it already real? Elvis didn't answer. That silence was enough. She walked toward him. You really think you're going to lose me? Elvis leaned against the doorframe. I don't know. You've never said that before. I've never had to. Priscilla studied his face. You've always acted like nothing could touch you. He gave a small, tired smile. That's the job. No. She shook her head. That isn't the job, that's the mask. Elvis looked down. She was right. And he knew it. The hotel outside was still alive. Music floated through the halls. People laughed. Waiters carried trays. Guests talked excitedly about the performance. Somewhere downstairs, people were already discussing how incredible Elvis had been that night. They had no idea. They hadn't seen what happened backstage. They hadn't seen the man sitting at the piano. They hadn't seen Priscilla standing outside the door. They hadn't heard the words he never intended anyone else to hear. But one person had. The young assistant. And he was now standing in a small service hallway, holding a cigarette between his fingers. He wasn't smoking it. He was thinking. He knew he shouldn't tell anyone. But secrets in places like this rarely stayed secret. Especially when the secret involved Elvis Presley. A stage manager approached him. You were in the rehearsal room, weren't you? The assistant looked up. Yeah. What happened? Nothing. The stage manager frowned. Nothing. The assistant shook his head. Just a rehearsal. The stage manager looked at him suspiciously. You're a terrible liar. The assistant smiled nervously. I didn't see anything. But the stage manager knew. Something had happened. And by the next morning, whispers would begin. Not about the song. Not about the argument. But about Elvis stopping his performance. About Priscilla leaving the rehearsal. About the unusual private moment backstage. And once rumors started, there would be no easy way to stop them. Back in the private room, Elvis sat on a chair. Priscilla remained standing. She folded the paper carefully. You should keep this. Elvis looked at her. Why? Because it's yours. He shook his head. No. He reached for it. It's yours. She hesitated. Then handed it back. Elvis folded the paper and placed it inside the pocket of his white jumpsuit. Priscilla watched him. You really meant that? What? The last line. Elvis looked at the floor. Yes. She took a breath. Then don't make me feel like I'm already gone. He looked up. I don't want you gone. Then stop making me feel invisible. The words landed harder than anything else that night. Elvis slowly stood. How? She shook her head. I don't know. That isn't fair. I know. Then tell me. She looked at him. You want me to tell you? Yes. Fine. She took a breath. Sometimes I walk into a room and everyone looks at you. Everyone wants your attention. Everyone wants your time. Everyone wants a piece of you. Elvis listened. And I understand that. I knew what your life was going to be. She paused. But sometimes. Her voice trembled. Sometimes I want you to look at me like I'm not standing in the shadow of Elvis Presley. Elvis's eyes softened. You're not. But I feel like I am. He stepped closer. I'm sorry. She looked at him. It was a simple sentence. But coming from Elvis, it meant something. Because he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming the pressure. He was simply apologizing. Priscilla's eyes filled with tears again. I don't want your fame. I know. I don't want your money. I know. I don't want everyone to know who I am. Elvis nodded. What do you want? She looked directly into his eyes. You. The room became silent. Elvis closed the distance between them. He gently took her hands. Then you've got me. If you're still with us, I want to ask you something. Do you think love can survive when one person belongs partly to the whole world? Comment yes if you think it can. Comment no if you think fame eventually takes too much from a relationship. And don't forget to like the story and subscribe if you want more dramatic stories inspired by the golden era of music. Most importantly, tell me where you're watching from, your city or country. I genuinely want to see how far this story has traveled. Because the next moment is where everything takes an unexpected turn. The next morning, Las Vegas woke beneath a pale desert sun. But inside the hotel, the whispers had already started. Two employees were talking quietly near the service elevator. I heard he stopped the show. No, he didn't stop the show. He did something different. What? Nobody knows. Another employee joined them. I heard Priscilla walked out during rehearsal. The first two went silent. Who told you? Someone who was there. Did Elvis follow her? No. Then what happened? The employee shrugged. They were alone backstage. The story changed with every person who repeated it. By noon, there were already several versions. In one version, Elvis had stormed out. In another, Priscilla had threatened to leave. Someone claimed Elvis cancelled the entire rehearsal. Someone else claimed he'd written a song for her. That version was closer to the truth. But nobody knew the whole truth. Except Priscilla. And Elvis. That afternoon, Elvis returned to the rehearsal room. The band was already there. The same piano. The same microphones. The same stage lights. But the atmosphere was different. One musician looked at Elvis. You all right? Elvis smiled. I'm good. The musician nodded. Last night was something. Elvis looked at him. What do you mean? You know. Elvis smiled faintly. Everybody's got an opinion. The musician laughed. That's Las Vegas. Elvis walked toward the piano. He opened the lid. The paper was gone. He looked confused. He checked his pocket. It wasn't there. His expression changed. He looked around the room. Then he noticed Priscilla standing near the back wall. She was holding the paper. Elvis smiled. You took it. She nodded. I did. Why? I wanted to keep it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then smiled. Good. The band watched them. Nobody said anything. But Elvis suddenly turned toward the musicians. Let's rehearse. The musicians picked up their instruments. The music started. And something strange happened. Elvis seemed lighter. Not happier exactly, but calmer. The pressure was still there. The schedule was still packed. The crowds would still scream. The cameras would still follow. But something inside him had shifted. He had finally said the words he'd been afraid to say. And perhaps that was enough. For now. But then, during rehearsal, a man walked into the room. He was holding a small envelope. Mr. Presley. Elvis looked over. What is it? The man handed him the envelope. "This was delivered for you." Elvis opened it. Inside was a single photograph. He looked at it. His face changed instantly. Priscilla noticed. "What is it?" Elvis didn't answer. He turned the photograph over. There was a handwritten message on the back. "You should know what people are saying about you." Elvis stared at the words. Then he looked at Priscilla. She immediately understood that whatever was inside that envelope had nothing to do with music. It had something to do with them. Something someone else had seen. Something someone else wanted them to know. Elvis slowly handed the photograph to Priscilla. She looked at it. Her expression changed. The photograph showed Elvis and Priscilla backstage the previous night. Not on stage. Not performing. Standing together in the hallway. The image had clearly been taken from a distance. Someone had been watching them. Priscilla looked at Elvis. "Who took this?" He shook his head. "I don't know." The room suddenly felt colder. The rehearsal continued around them, but neither of them heard the music anymore. Elvis looked toward the hallway. His jaw tightened. For the first time that night, the fear wasn't about losing Priscilla. It was about someone else trying to enter their private world. He folded the photograph, then quietly said, "Find out who took this." The assistant standing nearby looked nervous. Because he already knew. And he knew exactly where the photograph had come from. That evening, Elvis stood alone in front of the hotel window. Las Vegas glittered below him. Thousands of lights. Thousands of people. A city that never seemed to sleep. Priscilla stood behind him. "You're thinking too much." He smiled. "Probably." She walked beside him. "You can't control what people say." "I know." "You can't control what they photograph." "I know." "You can't control what they believe." Elvis looked at her. "But I can control what happens between us." She nodded. "Yes." He took her hand. "Then that's what I'm going to do." For a moment, they stood together. No audience. No band. No cameras. No stage. Just two people looking out over a city that would never know how close they had come to losing each other. Then Elvis whispered, "Tomorrow night, I'm going to change the show." Priscilla looked at him. "Why?" He smiled. "Because there's something I need to say." "What?" "You'll see." She shook her head. "Elvis." He smiled. "Trust me." But neither of them knew that the photograph had already set something in motion. Something that would force Elvis to make a decision in front of everyone. A decision that could change how the world saw him. And when the lights came on the following night, Priscilla would realize exactly what he had planned. The following evening, the lights of the International Hotel slowly began to dim. Thousands of people filled the room. They were waiting for Elvis. Behind the curtain, the musicians were ready. The stage manager looked at his watch. 2 minutes. Elvis stood silently. He was wearing the white jumpsuit. The same kind of outfit the audience had come to expect. But tonight, something was different. Priscilla stood nearby. Elvis looked at her. "You ready?" She smiled. "I think so." He took her hand for a moment, then let go. The lights went down. The crowd erupted. Elvis walked onto the stage. The applause was enormous. He smiled, took the microphone, and looked across the room. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke. Sometimes people think they know you because they've seen you 1,000 times. The room became quiet, but they don't know what happens when the lights go out. Priscilla watched from backstage. She knew exactly what he meant. Elvis continued. There are things you can't explain from a stage. He paused. There are people you can't replace with applause. The audience listened carefully. Then Elvis looked toward the side of the stage. Toward Priscilla. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Everyone could see where he was looking. Then he sat at the piano. The first notes of the private melody filled the room. The same melody he'd played alone the previous afternoon. But this time he wasn't hiding. He sang it openly. Not as a superstar. As a husband. When the final note faded, the room remained silent for one long second. Then the applause exploded. Elvis stood. He didn't bow immediately. Instead, he looked toward Priscilla. She was crying, but she was smiling too. Elvis finally smiled back. If you've made it this far, tell me one thing in the comments. Do you think Elvis made the right choice by revealing his feelings publicly? And don't forget to asterisk like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from asterisk. I'd love to know how many countries are listening to this story. After the performance, Elvis returned backstage. Priscilla was waiting. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I know. You embarrassed me. I know. She laughed through her tears. Then why? Elvis looked at her. Because yesterday you told me you felt invisible. He stepped closer. I wanted you to know that you aren't. Priscilla touched his hand. You know this doesn't fix everything. I know. There will still be difficult days. I know. She smiled. But you're finally talking to me. Elvis nodded. That was the idea. They stood together in the quiet hallway. No cameras. No audience. No applause. Just them. Then Priscilla reached into her purse and pulled out the folded piece of paper containing the unfinished song. She handed it to Elvis. He looked surprised. I thought you wanted to keep it. I did. Then why give it back? She smiled. Because I think you should finish it. Elvis looked at the paper. Then at her. Together. She nodded. Together. He smiled. And for the first time that night, the king of rock and roll didn't feel like he had to perform. He simply took her hand. They walked away from the stage. Behind them, the lights continued to shine. The audience continued to celebrate. But nobody outside that hallway knew what had really happened. They only knew that Elvis had given an unforgettable performance. They didn't know that the most important moment of the night had happened before the applause. Behind a closed door. With a piano. A piece of paper. And a woman who had almost walked away. Because sometimes the moments that change a person's life aren't the ones thousands of people witness. Sometimes they're the moments nobody was ever supposed to see. And that night in Las Vegas, Elvis finally chose to be seen by the one person who mattered most.